like we had a question the other day, how come Metcons are so similar? And I was like, well, they're specifically geared towards progressing specific movements, making sure that you guys are getting regular touches on them so that you can improve shoulder endurance, position, stability, whatever it might be. But it was just interesting having that kind of question, because it's like, there's almost like they just want it to be sporadic, or they want it to be the hopper. But then they still want progress at the same time.
Yeah.
But in terms of your question, I think it definitely needs to be just being okay with going by feel. We want things to be just laid out for us. So we want it to be, I don't have to come in, I can be mindless. I don't have to think about anything. He told me I need to lift 53, that's what I'm lifting. But reality is there's so many variables that you probably need to pay attention to.
Welcome back to the Unbound Unplugged podcast. This is episode 21, and it is about mental health around CrossFit. We had a listener question that asked us they would love to have an episode about mental health around CrossFit, times that you and I have struggled, and some challenges that we've faced. Starting off with you, Michael, what do you believe the mental health issues are around CrossFit, specifically inside a box?
There's a few, so it's a tricky one to start with. Obviously, for each individual, it's going to be different depending on past experiences. Main one is always intimidation. We've spoken about having shirts where people have their training age to try and address this issue. So when someone walks into the class, there's a bit more context. They go, okay, this person's been training for 10 years, this person's been training for 2, this person's 3 months. So when they're in that state of comparison, there's more context around it and it's more realistic. It's not just an assumption. That happened to me. It's probably happened to you as well the first time you stepped in there. We just got addicted to the workout. So our personalities, they probably align with seeking adversity and challenges and needing continual progress. I know I'm someone who, if I'm not stimulated, I really struggle. So I always try and find things to do. I'm sitting here holding a hammer. But you know what I mean? Like, I've got to stay busy. So CrossFit was perfect for me because it just gave me heaps to try and work on, always have things to focus on. I've been doing it for a long period now. So recently, one of the most recent challenges I found was I was just getting bored. So I'd learnt most of the skills. I don't necessarily need to be the best at anything. I just like being competitive. So as long as I'm close enough to Matt to scare him every now and again, that's all that really matters, even if it's only on the first round. And then I found I really struggled with that after we made quarters and after we did Torian and everything. It was great. Like, don't get me wrong, I really enjoyed the event, but it was not what I thought it was going to be. And then going and doing Down Under as well, there didn't seem to be kind of what I thought CrossFit was. In terms of, for me personally, I'd built it up to be this amazing camaraderie group thing that we get told it is. We see it in the class environment. Obviously at your local box you have that, and then when you step outside there's elements of it, but it's just kind of not what my expectation was. So coming back, that really got me down. Like our team, yeah, it was great. There was obviously a minority of other teams that were great, really social, but it's that extremely competitive environment where everyone's still kind of out for themselves. And I'm not necessarily motivated by that. So for me, I've always been one who wants group success. Like, I don't mind walking the path least walked. I just don't want to walk it alone. And that was something I struggled with. So I stepped away from doing the competitive stuff. I dropped off on the TTT, the groups that I was training with, my friends. I stopped training with them. And I just kind of started doing my own thing. And the main focus was kind of after Christmas time, spending more time with family and things like that. I was coming down and training by myself. And I was like, okay, well, I tried to gain a bit more perspective. And one thing I've always tried to preach is like, fun is just a state of mind. You don't necessarily need to tie it to anything. It's really just your perspective. So I always kind of use the analogy, like we're kind of spoiled with sports. Like, you look at us, we have these nice green soccer fields, we get to go and play and kick on and things like that. And then people that don't, they just find a milk bottle and they play in the dirt, and it's just as fun, if not more fun. And that was kind of something I went back to, and I was like, you know what, I'm just a spoiled brat. I need to sort my shit out. But I need to do it alone. So I separated myself from that. I started doing my own stuff. I just went a bit sporadic with it. So I was just trying different things, trying to make it fun again. And I was lucky enough that I managed to do that. And now I've started incorporating a lot more group classes, training with people again, And I feel like I've got that fire back, but I didn't necessarily run away from anything is probably the biggest thing that I'm proud of as well. I feel like most people would have just stepped away altogether, maybe stopped training, maybe separated themselves from that group. But that was mine, for example.
Yeah, okay. And I guess the most relatable thing in that is competition can be quite unforgiving for a lot of people. They might finally make it to their first local competition. You know, they sign up as either intermediate or RX, one of the harder divisions, and then they get that reality check of, oh crap, these people are like miles and miles ahead of me. Maybe I'm not good enough to do this. And then they get down on themselves. They might not be putting in that extra effort that they have been. So at least that's a good way to pivot. And that mindset is look for the fun in training. And like you said, it's not tied to anything specific. It can just be tied to simple progressions, learning new skills, like becoming more adept with, you know, what you were weak with, what did let you down in that competition, and just knuckling down on those things. For me personally, like, it's been a bit of a roller coaster for my CrossFit journey. I do agree with you with the whole training age thing. It's quite surprising sometimes where people look at me because I'm quite small and then I'm able to lift quite heavy, but they don't realize I've got 10 years of Olympic weightlifting and powerlifting backgrounds. It's like I've got a lot of time under a barbell where they wouldn't, and they try and compare themselves to me, and it can be hard because they're like, well, this little guy is lifting twice as much as I am and I'm twice as big as him. So it can kind of be disorientating. It's like, how do I get to that? And from my perspective too as well, it's like, you know, I've been ebbs and flows. Like I've had, you know, super high interest into competing. I've gone right into it, made the Torian, and it was like, awesome, this is great. And then same as you, like once I finished that, it was like, okay, what's next? Like it's like, that's all I set out to do. I achieved that, and then I had nothing. And it was like, I went through this big phase of just Olympic weightlifting. I kind of toned back on CrossFit. I wasn't as fit anymore. The Open came out. I got a worse Open score. So it was like, am I regressing in my fitness? It's kind of hard. Like there's a lot of stuff that can go through your head that can really set you down. But at the end of the day, I think having that progression in something, and the beauty of CrossFit is that there's so much you can progress, and it might not just be getting a better Open score or, you know, winning the local comp. It can be something like I'm doing right now, which is my daily handstands. And it started purely for the fact that I wanted to get a 1 minute handstand hold in any variation, and it's now progressed to now I have handstand hold variations that I want to get all to 1 minute, not just a conventional freestanding handstand hold. It's the technique that goes behind it, developing the mobility, and like it's only a thing that I've done daily purely because if I don't do it daily, I don't feel like I will achieve that goal in a relative amount of time for my personal goals. But that's given me that motivation, that fun, back into what I would call the CrossFit style training. Like, of course, on the other side of it, I'm looking at competing in powerlifting, and purely because I enjoy those three lifts, and that's my background. That's what I lean towards more, is the three big lifts anyway. But doesn't mean I don't like CrossFit classes. I don't like jumping in, and that's been my big thing this year, is just do the class with the members, because it's what CrossFit is supposed to be about, not the CrossFit the sport, or CrossFit the method, with, you know, the local box, the coach, the group programming and things like that.
Yeah, definitely. Like, I mean, I'm the same. I just made the choice to go, whatever I find fun, I'm going to do. And I'm going to make sure that I try and say yes to as much things as possible. I'm very analytical. I love numbers. I love things to be structured. But for example, like all of that being there, it just wasn't happening. So doing all the periodization, doing all the extra volume, doing the 3 or 4 touches, having all the structured programming, but then still not really getting any progress. And I was like, okay, well, time to go against the grain. Like, we've spoken about it already, where I just threw that all out the window. Yeah. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to squat 3 days a week. Whatever it feels like, it feels like. If I feel like shit, the empty bar squats, I'm just sitting in the bottom. But I was squatting 3 days a week. Yeah. I didn't worry about the periodization. I just went by feel. I went and did a little bit of extra bodybuilding. I mean, I have a little bit more understanding, so I know, okay, I can probably hit these rep ranges. We spoke about some of the studies that came out, especially recently. If you look at a lot of what we get taught, these new studies that come out and contradict everything we get taught, it takes 10 years for them to now change those books and then start to educate that. But if you're reading and keeping up with the literature, you're like, oh, okay, maybe we need to pivot. Yeah. Technology gets better, testing gets better. We start to try and redo things, and we realize that we were doing them wrong.
Yeah.
And that's okay. Like I just realized same thing with my training, that I was just doing it wrong.
Yeah, exactly. And I heard this really cool thing, and it was like, people who have an opinion about a way to do something, like a set grain, a set specific pathway to do a specific thing. It's like, how do you know that that's the right way to do it? Because there's people who have been studying that particular pathway their entire life, and they're not even sure that it's the right way to do something. So it's good to have that open mind when it comes to your training. And I mean, let's look at the normal member. What do you think some mental health challenges coming into CrossFit for someone who's newer to it would be for just a regular person coming to the gym?
It's definitely ties in with what we said. It's comparison. So it's like, okay, you've got a percentage guide, you've got periodization with programming. There's a lot more structure now compared to initial CrossFit. Like we had a question the other day, how come Metcons are so similar? And it's like, well, they're specifically geared towards progressing specific movements, making sure that you guys are getting regular touches on them so that you can improve shoulder endurance, position, stability, whatever it might be. But it was just interesting having that kind of question, because it's like, there's almost like they just want it to be sporadic, or they want it to be the hopper. But then they still want progress at the same time.
Yeah.
But in terms of your question, I think it definitely needs to be just being okay with going by feel. We want things to be just laid out for us. So we want it to be, I don't have to come in, I can be mindless. I don't have to think about anything. He told me I need to lift 53, that's what I'm lifting. But reality is there's so many variables that you probably need to pay attention to.
Yeah.
Like you're tired from yesterday's session, you didn't sleep very well, you didn't have as much water, whatever it might be, and you need to self-regulate your training.
Yeah.
And that's something that I think a lot of people struggle with, because they'll see the percentage, they forget about everything else, and they're not paying attention to themselves, but they get themselves down because like, but I can't do the weight, or it's like, oh, I can't do the reps, or I can't do what that person's doing. And they have to try and reframe that, where it's like, that's fine. Like for me, for example, doing the workouts, like, it's like, okay, I'm just going to make it a little bit more challenging for me, whatever it might be. And I'm just going to finish last and just try and get used to losing. I just want to be good with losing. And then inherently that's going to help me get better, because I'm going to be okay with being challenged. Which, yeah, it definitely takes a lot of reflection to get to that point.
Yeah. And I think as well, like talking about the hopper, if people think that like that whole like sporadic or like constantly varied, random, like the idea of CrossFit is you're supposed to be so well trained that if that was to happen, you would be prepared for whatever the challenge that was to come out. It's not that your training should be random all the time. Like it needs to have some periodization, because the biggest thing that keeps you motivated is progression. If you're not progressing, you're not going to be motivated. You don't just get motivation. You're like, oh crap, I saw Michael hit a 200 kilo back squat, I'm motivated to lift. It's like, no, you look at yourself and it's like, I went from 100 to 101 today. I'm progressing. I'm 99 kilos off that 200. I'm motivated to keep going on this squat program. It's not the other way around. It's, you don't just gain motivation nowhere. So I think that's a pretty good, well-rounded conversation on the mental health around CrossFit. If anyone out there listening has any questions or anything that they struggle with, don't hesitate to leave a comment down below, or send us a message on Instagram at Unbound Athletic. And that's going to cover off our episode 21, mental health around CrossFit.